Right, let's talk about Blue Ocean strategy. Many of you may already be familiar with it if you are a management major or a marketing major, but it's a very hot strategy, a framework that's being discussed quite a bit, and I want you to be familiar with it. The idea behind Blue Ocean strategy is kind of a combination strategy without them saying it is. The authors state that it is not one of the generic strategies. It is neither differentiation or cost leadership. It is something completely new. Perhaps it is an extension of this idea of a combination strategy, that you're going into blue markets or blue ocean as opposed to red markets or red ocean where competitors are fighting like sharks over the existing customers, like sharks might fight over fish. So how do you enter a blue market? We would all love to enter a blue market. How you do it is you identify the factors that the industry is currently competing on. You think about a market that is being neglected, factors that are being competed on you put into your strategy canvas. That's your first new tool. And then you use the eliminate, reduce, raise, create grid to figure out ways to decrease costs, increase differentiation, and compete in new ways. The example from the article is Casella Wines that makes Yellowtail wine. I'm going to ask you to go back in time before you even thought about wine, really, when this takes place. Wine used to be difficult to become an informed consumer of. Wine was sold in wine shops. Most of the labels were cream colored with calligraphy writing in black, so very hard to differentiate just visually between bottles of wine. There was a lot of knowledge you needed to have about grapes and growing regions and New World wines versus Old World wines. And we didn't even have cameras on our phones. We didn't even have mobile phones. So you can just take the picture of the label of a wine that you liked. Back in the day, we would keep wine journals, and you would soak the label off your bottle of wine and you'd put it in your wine journal, and then you'd take your tasting notes on that. And now there's an app for that. Okay, so go back in time, not the way that you see wine racks now. Casella Wine decided, as a massive producer in Australia, that they wanted to enter the US market. They looked to see what categories that the industry competed on. As you can see here, whether it was premium or budget, they still competed on terminology, such as the terroir of the growing region. Both, even if it was a budget wine, aged the wine. They talked about vineyard prestige, and they worked for complexity of taste in the wine. Now, Casella decided to go after this blue market of the beer drinker. Right? Even though a beer drinker doesn't buy much wine, there's a lot of beer drinkers in the United States who still have to buy a bottle of wine or two over the course of a year. So they started to think about how could they compete differently for the beer drinkers. And so they used the eliminate, reduce, raise, create grid to think about what have we been taking for granted that we could just get rid of? Right? What are some things that companies spend money on that we could reduce? What could we improve that would appeal to this blue market? And then what could be completely new that they could use to go after this market? So if you look at the eliminate, reduce, raise, create grid for Casella Wines, you'll see that they completely eliminated specialized terminology and aging, which makes your inventory holding costs lots cheaper. Plus, you're not paying for oak casks to age your wine in. It goes straight into the steel tank and straight into the bottle, right? So it improves your profitability. They raised the price compared to budget wine. They started doing in-store promotion. So this was back in the day when Crocodile Dundee was fun and big. And so they highlighted the Australian connection. Something that didn't show up in the article is they also raised the alcohol content on the wine through osmosis. But that's a pretty common process now in New World wines. They reduced the wine complexity, so they knew that beer drinkers would want something that was very fruit forward, that you could taste the first kind of sweetness of it right away. They reduced the range of products down to just two, red and white at the time. They reduced talking about vineyard prestige. They created it easy to drink, easy to find. It was the first wine to have a really fun label that was easy to remember. Nowadays, you're used to that. You're used to, Fat Bastard, Three-Legged Dog, all these funny names that make it easier to remember wines, but that was quite new. And they were very, very successful. So if we go back to this strategy canvas, you can see they're there in yellow. They priced above the budget, below the premium, but above the budget, and yet their cost of production were much, much lower because they got rid of aging and the complexity of taste and the range of offerings. And then they added in some new areas to compete in that other wines then also decided to adopt. So let's do another example. Once again, going back in time, think back to the first Wii game system. It's sold out for a couple holiday seasons. Nintendo, with the very first Wii game system, went after a blue market, a blue ocean. They went after moms, not the traditional gamers who bought and played Xbox and PlayStation. So what did they do? Well, if we think about it, they lowered the price compared to these two, then completely got rid of the hard disk, the surround sound, the DVD, and connectivity of the internet, right? So most gamers would not consider this a really good offering. However, they added in kind of moving around and connection between people. And so they were able to sell that to moms that this was going to be a game station that would keep their kids active. And if you remember the ads, all the kids are smiling and jumping around and just adoring their mother. And it was very successful. So think about how you can apply this to your project. Look at the industry you're competing in. What are the assumed things that categories or factors that you compete on? And then think about ways that you could improve your differentiation going after a new market while still reducing costs.